It's really been an honor and a privilege to serve as chair of the firm-wide Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. Thompson Hine's distinctively inclusive culture is what attracted me to the firm in the first place, and it continues to make Thompson Hine a special, one-of-a-kind firm. I don't take that exceptionalism for granted, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've had to support it. Too many people have been trusted allies in this work over the past years to thank now, but please know that it is deeply appreciated. I look forward to supporting Roy Hadley and all of you as you help Thompson Hine lead the way. It is fitting that my final act as chair is introducing our speaker today, Andrew Solomon, as it is yet another example of the privileges of this role. Andrew, we are so excited to have you with us today. With degrees from Yale and Cambridge, Andrew is an acclaimed writer and lecturer on politics, culture, and psychology. He's also an activist and philanthropist in LGBT rights, mental health, education, and the arts. Andrew is the founder of the Solomon Research Fellowship in LGBT Studies at Yale University and a member of the board of directors of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and Trans Youth Family Allies. Andrew's newest book, Far From the Tree, Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity, was named one of the 10 best books of 2012 by the New York Times and has garnered significant critical acclaim, including the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction and the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. You may remember that his book is the one that was mentioned at last year's Diversity Champion Award luncheon in the remarks by Cleveland Foundation CEO Ron Richard. Andrew's TEDx speech, inspired by his book, has been viewed by 2.4 million people. Far From the Tree has been described as a brave, beautiful book that will expand your humanity. There is a universal quality to Andrew's message that makes him an ideal speaker for us today. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Solomon.
My tremendous thanks for that generous introduction and for the warm welcome. And let me just say how much I admire the diversity initiative at Thompson Hine. I've become aware of it since Robin was first in touch with me, and it seems you really are leading the way, which is a fantastic thing to be doing. Even in purely non-religious terms, homosexuality represents a misuse of the sexual faculty. It is a pathetic little second-rate substitute for reality, a pitiable flight from life. As such, it deserves no glamorization, no rationalization, and above all, no pretense that it is anything but a pernicious sickness. That's Time magazine in 1966, when I was 3 years old. And in the last year, as you know, the President of the United States and the Supreme Court have expressed support for gay marriage. And I set out to investigate how that happened. How did something universally understood to be an illness come to be thought of instead as an identity? And if it was possible for the illness of homosexuality to morph into the identity of gayness, then what other illnesses were there out there that could be turned into identities? And through what process could such a change take place? When I was perhaps 6 years old, I went with my mother and my brother to a store just up Madison Avenue called Indian Walk Shoes. I'm not sure that name would go down so well today. And when my brother and I had finished getting our shoes fitted, we were told by the salesman that each of us could have a balloon to take home. My brother wanted a red balloon, and I wanted a pink balloon. And my mother said that she thought I'd really rather have a blue balloon. And I said, no, I really wanted the pink balloon. And she reminded me that my favorite color was blue. The fact that my favorite color now is blue, but I'm still gay, should give you some sense of a mother's influence and its limits. When I was growing up, my mother used to say all the time, The love for your children is like no other feeling in the world, and until you have children, you don't know what it feels like. And when she first started saying that, it was the loveliest thing I'd ever heard. It meant that bringing up my brother and me was the great joy of her life. And when I was a little bit older and she said the same thing, it made me anxious. I thought, but I'm gay, and if I'm gay, I probably can't have children. And I was concerned about it. And after I came out in my early 20s, it made me angry. And I said, you know that I'm gay, you know that's not the path that I'm on, and I want you to stop saying that. But she never did. In 1994, my editors at the New York Times Magazine asked me to write an article about deaf culture. And I was very taken aback. I had thought of deafness entirely as a disability, those poor people, they couldn't hear. And then I went out into the deaf world. I went to deaf clubs, I went to deaf theater, I went to various things at Gallaudet, the Deaf University in DC. I even went to the Miss Deaf America contest in Nashville, Tennessee, where everyone complained about the slurry Southern signing. And as I immersed myself deeper and deeper in that world, I came to understand that deafness is, in fact, a culture. It's a very rich and a very vital culture, and a very attractive one. And there were even moments, I remember arriving at the National Association of the Deaf meeting, when I wished I were deaf. Not that I wished I couldn't hear, because I use my hearing all the time, and it's very useful to me, but moments when I thought it would be nice to be part of this culture, these people all communicating with their hands flying through the air, and all rushing to embrace one another, and I saw how it could be valued. And then I discovered that most deaf children are born to hearing parents, that those parents historically have tended to try to bring those children up to function in the hearing world, historically by focusing on lip reading and oral speech, and that many of those children discover deaf culture in adolescence or thereafter, when it comes as a glorious revelation to them. And I thought how similar that was to the experience of gay people who were born to straight parents, who often try to encourage them to function in what they see as the mainstream world, and who often then come to a sense of gay identity in adolescence or thereafter, when it feels like a great liberation. And then a friend of mine had a daughter who was a dwarf, and suddenly she began saying, do I bring her up to think she's just like everyone else, but a little bit shorter? Or do I, in fact, tell her that she's a dwarf and that that's some wonderful thing and get involved in the little people of America? Do I try to construct a dwarf identity? And as she narrated her bewilderment, I thought, here it is again. Here it is again, someone who perceives, a family that perceives itself to be normal, having a child whom they perceive to be exceptional in some unfamiliar way. And it was at that point that I hatched the notion that there are really two kinds of identities. There are what I've called vertical identities, handed down generationally, so one's ethnicity, one's nationality, usually one's language, frequently one's religion. These are things that parents and children are likely to have in common. And some of those vertical identities can be difficult, but we've never tried to cure them. So you can say the current presidency and the initiatives here notwithstanding, that it's still easier in the United States, as currently constructed in many places, to be white than it is to be a member of a minority ethnicity. But there is no research being done on how to ensure that the next generation of children born to Asian or Latino or African American parents come out with blonde hair and blue eyes. We feel the problem is in the society, and it's the society we set out to fix. And then there are what I've called horizontal identities. Horizontal because they're learned not from one's parents, but from a peer group. And because that process of learning an identity, like being gay, like being deaf, like being a dwarf, that process is a vital and difficult one that people have to achieve in relation to their peers. So let me tell you for a moment about one of the dwarfs I got to know when I did the chapter of my book that's on dwarfs. So there's a young man named Clinton Brown. When he was born with dystrophic dwarfism, his parents were told that it was a grossly disabling condition, that he would never learn to walk or talk or recognize them, and that they should leave him in the hospital to die quietly. And he said, his mother said that she wasn't going to do that. She said she wanted to take her baby home. She said, if he dies quietly at home, at least I'll know I did my best. And even though she didn't have vast educational or economic resources, she found her way to the best doctor for the treatment of dwarfism and dwarfing conditions in the United States, Dr. Stanley Kopitz at Johns Hopkins. And in the course of his childhood, Clinton had more than 30 major invasive surgical procedures, as a result of which he can, in fact, walk. And while he was stuck in the hospital for these procedures, some of which, because they were spinal procedures, involved his being immobilized for periods of 6 weeks at a time, he thought there wasn't very much else to do and that he might as well focus on his schoolwork. And so that's what he did. And he ended up achieving academically at a level that had never before been considered in his family, and was the first member of his family to go to college. And his mother called me one day. He was going to college not far from where his parents lived, but living on campus, member of a fraternity, having college life. His mother called me and said, I was driving home today and I saw Clinton's car and it was parked outside a bar. And she said, and I thought to myself, he's 3 feet tall, they're 6 feet tall, 2 beers for them is 4 beers for him. She said, I wanted to go in there, but I knew I couldn't get away with that, so I just went home and left him 11 messages on his voicemail. She said, and then I thought, if someone had told me when he was born that my future worry would be that he would go drinking and driving with his college buddies, I'd have been so thrilled to have that problem. And I said to her, what do you think you did? How did you take someone for whom there was such a dire prognosis and help him to emerge as someone who is dynamic and popular and fun and accomplished and happy? And she said, what did we do? We loved him, that's all. Clinton just always had that light in him, and we were lucky enough to be the first to see it there. This was the kind of story that I encountered over and over again. In my book, I ended up talking about deafness, dwarfism, Down syndrome, autism, schizophrenia, about families of people with multiple disabilities, about families of prodigies who are also quite overwhelmed, about families who are dealing in one way or another with children conceived in rape, who don't exist officially as an identity group, but who pose an impediment sometimes to their parents' love. I looked at families of people who commit crimes, and I looked at families of people who are transgender. And over again, what I heard from these families as I talked to them was that they loved those children, that those were the children they had grown attached to. I talked, for example, to Tom and Karen Robards, who were hard-charging Wall Street types when their first child was born, though they were very young, was born with Down syndrome, and they were utterly unprepared for it. And they then, when he was a few years old, felt that the educational options available to him here in New York were not satisfactory. And so with a few other parents, they formed together and got a teacher who could teach their students. That one little episode, the little classroom, it was 2 classrooms when they started, has since grown into something called the Cook Center, where untold tens of thousands of people with intellectual disabilities have been educated. And I said to Tom and Karen, I said, this has ended up being your life. Do you regret it? Do you wish your son didn't have Down syndrome? Would you like to make it go away? And Tom said, well, for our son David, I would make it go away because I would like to give him an easier life, and it gives him a hard life. He said, but I think if we were to lose everyone with Down syndrome from the society, we would really lose something of great value. And his mother said, well, I agree. For David, I might make it go away because I would like to give David an easier life. But speaking for myself, well, I would never have believed when he was born 30 years ago I could come to such a point. I have. For David, I would make it go away in an instant, but it has given me a richer, more meaningful, more purposeful, and more focused life, and I wouldn't exchange those experiences for anything in the world. We live in a time of extraordinary social progress. We live also in a time of extraordinary medical progress. The social progress means that we are more and more willing to accept people who are gay, who are disabled, who are dwarfs, or who are deaf, or who have Down syndrome. But cochlear implants given to most children born with deafness in the United States in this day and age mean that people have are able to grow up effectively in the hearing world. They allow sound information to bypass the structures of the ear. Most of those children will not communicate in sign language and will be part of that deaf culture that I witnessed. There's a new compound, BMN 111, which is in testing in humans now. When it's given to mice who have the gene for achondroplasia, the most common dwarfing condition, those mice grow to full size because it blocks the gene. In terms of Down syndrome, there are more and more tests that can be given earlier and earlier in pregnancy to pick up whether somebody is carrying a genetic so-called defect, and making it easier and easier for those who wish to do so to terminate those pregnancies. And I believe in medical progress, and I believe in social progress. It's only that I think they're sometimes on a collision course to which neither seems to be awake. And I think it would be helpful if each of them could see the others, and if people could think through what it means to cure away things that exist within our society. Because the responsibility of parents, and I come back over and over again to the structure of family, the responsibility of parents is twofold. The responsibility of parents is to change our children. We educate them, we teach them some manners, we try to instill a sense of moral values. Not changing your children is neglect. And we also need to celebrate our children for who they are and make them feel terrific about themselves. And there are some things that clearly need to be celebrated, and there are some things that clearly need to be changed, and there's a great deal that falls in a foggy gray area in the middle, and we don't know whether to change it or to celebrate it. And a lot of these conditions that I was looking at are conditions in which the calculus between cure and acceptance is a very tense and a very complicated one. Jim Sinclair, an adult with autism, famously said, "When parents say, 'I wish my child did not have autism,' what they're really saying is, 'I wish the child I have did not exist, and I had a different, non-autistic child instead.'" Read that again. This is what we hear when you mourn over our existence. This is what we know when you pray for a cure, that your fondest wish is that someday we will cease to be, and strangers you can love will move in behind our faces. It's a very emphatic way of saying it, but the question of what is to be cured and what it means to cure someone requires examination. I interviewed, for the chapter I did on crime, the family of Dylan Klebold, who was one of the perpetrators of the Columbine massacre. And they hadn't wanted to talk to me. And when they finally agreed to do so, they were so full of their story that they couldn't stop telling it. And we spent a full weekend together, in the course of which I recorded more than 20 hours of interviews. And toward the end of it, we were all sitting in the kitchen, utterly exhausted. And I said to Sue Klebold and Tom Klebold, I said, "If Dylan were here now, is there anything you'd want to ask him?" And they said, "There sure is. I'd want to ask him what the hell he was doing." That was his father. And his mother said, "I would ask him to forgive me for being his mother and never knowing what was going on inside his head." And when I talked to his mother again over dinner some years later, I saw them many, many times, but this particular dinner in Denver, I said to her, "Do you remember that you said that?" And she replied, "You know, when it first happened, I used to wish I had never married, I had never had children. If I hadn't gone to Ohio State, I wouldn't have met Tom, these children wouldn't have existed, and this terrible thing wouldn't have happened. But over time, I've come to feel that I loved the children I had so much that I wouldn't want to imagine a life without them, even at the cost of this pain." When I say that, I'm talking about my own pain, of course, and not the pain of other people. But life is full of suffering, and this is mine. So while I know it would have been better for the world if Dylan had never been born, I believe it would not have been better for me. Now, I was very struck by all of these parents who seem to place so much value on all of these children who seem to have so many problems. And at first I thought, this is a ridiculous artifice. They don't actually relish these children. They aren't glad to have grown up in the world of Down syndrome. They aren't thrilled that their child is a dwarf. They aren't, in any of these instances, thrilled. How could Sue Klebold have said this? And then I realized that all of us who have children who are flawed. And all of us love them with their flaws. And if some glorious angel were to drop through the ceiling of Thompson Hine and offer all the parents in this room the chance to exchange the children they have for other better children who were more attractive and more intelligent and perhaps more polite, I think everyone would try to pray away that atrocious spectacle. And I felt it was rather summed up, this whole experience, by one mother I know with two very severely disabled children, one of whom died tragically through caregiver neglect, who said at the internment of that child's ashes, "Let me bury here the rage I feel to have been twice robbed. Once of the child I wanted, and once of the son I loved." And I found that people came to that point over and over again. Another one of the mothers I talked to who also had two children with very severe disabilities said, "People always give us these little sayings, like God doesn't give you any more than you can handle. But children like ours are not preordained as a gift. They're a gift because that's what we have chosen." And it was that process of choice that interested me. There are plenty of people who have children with disabilities and don't find enormous meaning in it. There are plenty of people in these circumstances who go completely to pieces. There are plenty of people who are uncomfortable with diversity and with difference of every kind. But I found over and over again, borne out, what an American sociologist of the mid-century said, which was that we not only care for our children because we love them, but also love them because we care for them. And these children require a very intense process of loving. And for the people who can muster that, they require an intense process of care, and for the people who can muster that, a great deal of love can ensue. Now, I decided to have children while I was in the midst of writing this book. And friends kept saying, "How can you be deciding to have kids in the middle of a book about everything that can go wrong?" And I had to say over and over again, but it's not a book about everything that can go wrong. It's a book about how much joy there can be in the experience even when everything seems to be going wrong. And rather than turn me away from parenting, it emboldened me toward it. And so I will explain the structure of my family in the most truncated way I can, which is that my husband is the biological father of two children with some lesbian friends in Minneapolis. One of my good friends from college had got divorced but wanted to have a child, and so we have a daughter, and mother and daughter live in Fort Worth. And then my husband and I wanted the experience of bringing up a child full time, and so we have a son of whom I'm the biological father. We had an egg donor, and our surrogate was Laura, the lesbian mother of his two biological children. So the shorthand is 5 parents of 4 children in 3 states. And there seem to be people who think that the existence of families such as mine somehow undermines the integrity of families such as theirs. And I don't accept those subtractive models of love, only additive ones. And I believe that in the same way that we need species diversity to keep the planet going, we also need this diversity of love and family and affection to sustain the ecosphere of kindness. The day after our son was born, the pediatrician came into the hospital room. She said that she was concerned. And we said, "Oh." And she said, "He's not extending his legs correctly." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "We really are worried that may indicate a neurological defect, and his muscle tone is high, and his head is very large, and he should be measured for hydrocephalus. And insofar as he is extending his legs, he's doing so asymmetrically, and that really could indicate a mass in his brain." And I felt the whole center of my being pour onto the floor. And I thought, here I've been writing about all of these families who found all of this meaning in all of these experiences of difference, and I don't want to join them. We went off for CAT scans, we went off for x-rays, we went off for an MRI, we went off for an arterial blood draw. We went through this day of testing with this child less than 24 hours old to whom we could be so little comfort. And as we were going, I kept thinking I wanted him to be okay. I wanted him to be okay for himself, but also to be okay for me. And I realized that I was thinking of whatever we were looking at in terms of illness, and that like all parents since the beginning of time, I wanted to protect my child from illness. But I also knew that if he actually had any of the things we were testing for, that would be his identity. And if it was his identity, it would become my identity too. And I suddenly thought, the love for your children is like no other feeling in the world. And until you have children, you don't know what it feels like. At the end of about 5 hours of this, the pediatrician called us back in and told us that the scans were all clear and that George was now extending his legs just the way he should. And when I asked what she thought had been going on in the morning, she said he had probably had a cramp. But I think in some profound way that fatherhood had ensnared me the moment that I associated it with loss. And I doubt I would have noticed that if I hadn't been in the thick of this book. And I realized that I had looked at all of these parents talking about the meaning they had found with all of these children, and at some level, I had thought that they were fools. At some level, I thought we can all talk this language of diversity, but when it comes down to it, there's so many ways in which what we want is conformity. And I thought they were enslaving themselves to a lifetime's journey with their possibly thankless children. And then that day in the hospital with George, I suddenly understood that my research had built me a plank and that I was ready to join them on their ship. Thank you.
Andrew, we are very pleased to present to you our inaugural Diversity Achievement Award. This piece of art, Mildred, show everybody. Okay. This piece of art is a custom-made glass wave with different colors of glass embedded in the crest of the wave. The piece symbolizes the impact of waves as the primary movers and shapers of our coastline. Waves make things happen. Waves change things. And this award is intended to recognize the real movers and shapers when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Andrew, in recognition of your steadfast commitment, activism, and philanthropy in the areas of diversity and inclusion, and the impact you've had, we are honored to present you with this inaugural award.
Let me say on behalf of the New York office how very honored we were to host our keynote speaker, Andrew Solomon. Thank you so much for being with us today. Your remarks, even for a non-parent like me, were very inspiring, so thank you. I'm very pleased to have served again as the chair of the award selection committee. I'm sort of hoping this is going to be a lifetime appointment. But I'd like to give you a short explanation of the award criteria and the selection process. As you're all aware, the annual Diversity Champion Award is designed to honor the person at Thompson Hine who best exemplifies Thompson Hine's commitment to diversity and inclusion in his or her professional and personal life. The recipient shall have demonstrated exceptional commitment and efforts both within the firm and in the community at large to encourage, promote, value, and include persons of diverse gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender expression, age, socioeconomic status, and physical and intellectual abilities. This year, I am pleased to report that there were 9 people nominated by their peers for this award. As you might imagine, there was intense discussion of each nominee, and the selection committee narrowed the list down to 4 people before taking a final vote to decide our winner. This last vote was especially difficult, and I believe that that is a great testament to the people in our firm who are doing so much to advance the firm's commitment to diversity. I'd like to thank the members of the award selection committee for their time and participation this year. The committee members were Robin Minter-Smyers, the firm-wide chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, Sarah Flannery, the firm-wide chair of the Women's Initiative, and our various partners in charge, Jim Aronoff from Cleveland, Tony White from Columbus, Shane Starkey from Cincinnati, Bob Curry in Dayton, Russ Rogers in Atlanta, and David Wilson in Washington. Thank you so much, all of you, for your help this year. Now, for the announcement of this year's winner, I always feel like there should be a drum roll. After much deliberation, the committee has decided that this year's winner is Barbara Lum in Cleveland.
I'm proud to present this award this year to Barbara. And because I think she's such a truly exceptional person and really exemplifies the criteria of the award, I want to take just a couple of minutes, and I really didn't want to leave anything out because although she has only been with us a few years, it's quite a long list. As a first-year attorney, she was the driving force behind restarting the Asian American Bar Association of Ohio and is a founding board member. She is also now president of the state association. Barbara is also active in the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, known as NAPABA, which is the top national legal organization for Asian American attorneys. Through her efforts, we've hosted important events for NAPABA, including the 2014 Central Region Conference here in the Cleveland office, and several of our Thompson Hine lawyers were featured as speakers. She's currently helping Alex Song of our Cincinnati office create a Southeastern Ohio Asian Bar chapter. Also significantly, she serves as the chair of the diversity subcommittee of the Defense Research Institute. I think a lot of you know DRI is the leading organization of defense attorneys and in-house counsel, and as an associate, Barbara is responsible for their national programming on diversity and inclusion. Here in the Cleveland office, Barbara can always be counted on to participate in our activities that take place both inside and outside our office. As far as her local community activities, one of her accomplishments was that she was one of the founding members of a group that sponsors and organizes the Cleveland Asian Festival. It's a celebration of Asian business and culture that attracts tens of thousands of people to Cleveland each year. She's an active member of the Finance and Compliance Committee as well as the Vendor Committee. Barbara's also the director of events for Motivations, a premier organization cultivating a vibrant Asian community for Greater Cleveland by promoting the attraction and retention of Asian American professionals. And last but certainly not least, here in the office, particularly here in Cleveland, Barbara has assumed a very significant mentoring role for a number of our diverse attorneys. Now, as I said before, Barbara's only been here for 4 short years, and I'm sure that she is just getting started on what will be an incredible career as a leader in the firm, not just in our D&I efforts, but generally. So, congratulations, Barbara. And I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie for some closing remarks.
Thank you. As we close, I just want to say thank you very much to Andrew Solomon for joining us. You really shared with us the most thought-provoking comments, Andrew. I wish I were there in person to meet you and congratulate you on receiving our inaugural Diversity Achievement Award. Congratulations also to Barbara on the Diversity Champion Award. And we'll now conclude the video conference portion of our meeting, and we will adjourn to our respective offices for our diversity lunch. And thank you very much for attending this most important day for Thompson Hine.